1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to look at verse 11. To about verse 21. 1 Samuel chapter 2. Picking up our story here. We have seen here in the story up to this point where you have a couple of main characters, and the story's about ready to shift away from Hannah and Elkanah, the mother and father of Samuel, to Samuel, Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas. And it'll make a transition after Hophni and Phinehas to Samuel further down the road. And this is the passage where the shift occurs. And last week I kind of touched on it with chapter 2, verse 11, that what you have in this section of the story, it's almost like you have two cameras with the same vantage point, or not same vantage, with different vantage points of the same scene. Imagine one camera is focused on Samuel, and he's looking back at the Temple Mount there at Shiloh, and the other camera is focused on Hophni and Phinehas, and it's focusing back. And when it's focused on Hophni and Phinehas, you can see what Samuel's doing. When it's focused on Samuel, you can see what Hophni and Phinehas are doing. And so there's this constant play back and forth between Samuel's character, Samuel's responsibility, Samuel's action, and Hophni and Phinehas' action. You pick this up here in chapter 2, starting in verse 11. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah. The boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. Now notice, it's the boy Samuel. He's a young boy. Remember, it's probably about the age of 3, maybe 4, that Samuel comes to work at the temple there in Shiloh. And as a young boy, has the knowledge to minister before the Lord, and we will see very quickly that the adult children of Eli are just absolute worthless men. Matter of fact, that's what the text says. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord, the customs of the priest, and the people that was, the priest with the people that was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest, the servants would come, and while the meat was boiling, with a 3-pronged fork in his hand, he would thrust it into the pan, the kettle, the cauldron, or the pot, and all that the fork brought up the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give meat to the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let me burn the fat first, then take as much as you wish," he would say, "No, you must give it now. And if not, I will take it by force." And thus the sins of the young men were very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy clothed with linen ephod. And his mother used to make him a little robe and take it to him each year. And when she went up with her husband, they offered the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children by this woman for the petition she asked from the Lord." So then they would return to their home, and indeed the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. Let's see what's going on. Eli and Hophni and Phinehas are worthless men. They have contempt for the things of God. And their contempt is demonstrated in how they obtain the meat that is supposed to come to the priest through sacrifice. See, one of the things that the sacrificial system did was it provided for the priests. There were certain foods that they could take from the sacrificing places and for their own substance. These individuals had a great deal of contempt for that action. Notice how the phrase begins, "the customs of the priests with the people." It's interesting phraseology, is it not? Not the laws, not the requirements, but the custom of the priest with the people at Shiloh was when a man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come, and while the meat was boiling, with a 3-pronged fork in his hand. Now there's a lot more discussion in the Hebrew about this fork than in the English. Hebrew is a beautiful language. It has a lot of what we would call superlative language that it just doesn't translate over well. It'd be a 3-tined fork, a fork with 3 tines, with 3 specific tines, a fork with 3 tines. We don't write English that way. You would have turned that into a high school English teacher, she would write you a big F on there because you just say it. It's a 3-tined fork. But the emphasis on the fork is, notice that when the fork goes into the pot, it gathers up all that it can with one thrust. This fork was designed for maximum gain. This fork was designed to take from God more than what was required for the priest. This fork was designed so the priest there could get more than what was their allotment. What was their allotment? Well, Deuteronomy 18:3 tells us what the allotment is. And it shall be the priest due from the people, from those offering a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep, they shall give the priest the shoulder and 2 cheeks and the stomach. The first fruit of your grain and the wine and your oil and the first fleece of your sheep you shall give him. And these individuals developed their own fork, their own device, to where when they walk past, and imagine, these are the people responsible, these are the individuals responsible for the sacrificial system at the temple, and they come by with a fork that everyone there knows is illegitimate. Because notice it doesn't say anything in Deuteronomy 18 about a fork. It says you give these things to them. Notice it says nothing about a fork. Notice it says nothing about it being in the cauldron or the pot or anything like that. So they go and they get their regular portion. They get their regular portion and they come to the people that are there cooking the rest, and they reach into their pot and they take from them more than their portion. These are God's men. This is why they are worthless men. They have no concept. They have utter contempt for the things of God. So much so that the opportunity at God's house is a means by which they exceed in greed. We see this today. There are pastors today that exceed in greed. There's one that believes that God says, I want you to buy a $6 million aircraft. And they got all mad, and instead of saying, hey, maybe I got my wires crossed, said, no, all you people that are hating on me for wanting to have a $6 million aircraft, you're the one that has the problem. Flight coach. Share the word of salvation. Fly first class. Share the gospel message. Think you need your own aircraft. You say, well, that only happens today. No. You go back through church history, and at any time individuals had absolute power within the church, they abused that absolute power. Are you going to tell the priest they can't do that? These are the mediators between you and God, supposedly. These are the individuals that are there to help in mediation once a year for sacrifice. That's what Eli's purpose is. You don't tell that guy no? They are worthless individuals because they utilize their power and position to take advantage of the flock. You say, that's right, pastors are like that. We are. Absolutely. There are a lot of them like that. There are a lot of people in the pews that are like that. There are a lot of folks that utilize position within churches, within organizations, within charitable organizations, within businesses, within the military, within the police forces, within name your organization. They utilize their position of power to oppress the folks that are there. We're talking here about Hophni and Phinehas. The problem is, they have a problem with the things of God, and they hold it in utter contempt. When we begin to take the things of God and hold it in utter contempt, we begin down this road, whether it's the pastor or the parishioner. We must always be on the watch for individuals like this. These are self-seeking, self-serving. But the boy, Samuel, the boy, is ministering before the Lord. And then in the background, you see him robbing from the people. And then the camera shifts to the foreground, and you see them thrust the fork in and take all that they can. And that's really how the Hebrew describes it. They are in the pot rooting around for the choicest part of meat and trying to stab for. Have you ever watched 4 fat guys at a buffet? And there's one thing left? Look, a unicorn! Right? Don't throw down with me at a Chinese buffet. I made them throw me out. Anyhow. Or at a German buffet. They were in it and holding it in absolute contempt. This is the sacrifice to the Lord. This is the Lord's portion they are stealing. And I have no problem with it. But the boy is ministering for the Lord. Do you see how Samuel is writing this back and forth? Where you see in the foreground this righteous boy and his mom and dad who are righteous parents who come once a year to offer sacrifices. And then Eli's 2 sons robbing the place. You thrust it into the pan. Let's look at the language here. The pan, the kettle, the cauldron, the pot. Whatever the instrument was to cook it in, they had no regard, because these are different sized objects. So you got a small thing going on, they got theirs cut. Large pot, they got their cut, and it was a full cut. And they were going to get all that they could get. We see this in the life of a lot of folks, in the life of church hoppers. They come to church not for what they can put into church, but what they can get out of church. What can I get out of church? What can it do for me? It's a selfish relationship that one has with the church when it develops. What can it do for me? What can it do for me? Me, 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 instead of what can I do to make the church better? And all that the fork would bring up, the priest would take for himself. Think of the level of contempt it takes to have that level of absolute abasement towards the things of God. That has to be an incredibly hardened heart to reach into the pot for the things that are for the Lord and drag up all that one can for oneself against the things of God. Which is why a little bit later on in 1 Samuel, the text says that the Lord desired to put these men to death. So the saddest language that you can see used of an individual within the Hebrew text is here in Samuel, and again in other parts where it says, these are worthless men. The Lord desires to put them to death. Go over to the prophecy in Daniel. You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting. None of us would like to have that as our epitaph on our tombstone. And yet that's exactly what these men were going to have. This they did at Shiloh to all of Israel. They didn't do it to certain ones. They did it to all the people of Israel. They were not a distinguisher amongst the crowd. Moreover, when the fat was to be burned, the priest's servant would come. So now not only the priests are involved, but now this corruption goes to who else? The servants. See, that's the thing about corruption. That's the thing about when you hold the things of God in contempt. While, yes, you may have individuals in the hierarchy that hold it in contempt, eventually, as it works its way down, it works itself down to the lower level. You see this constantly in the book of Judges. You see this, the phraseology is, in the day of the judges, when there was no king. And how does it finish out? When men did what was right in their own eyes. When the priests hold it in contempt, what do the people do? Think about being a parishioner going to the temple to offer your sacrifice and knowing that it's going to be stolen by two worthless individuals. And then the servants of the temple are going to come and take the rest of it. Would you be apt to go back to the temple? Elkanah and Hannah show great resolve in their spirituality by going year after year after year and dealing with these jokers year after year after year. Wouldn't it be so easy to go, well, they don't respect God's house, I don't have to respect God's house. Is that the answer? Absolutely not. Just because the leadership is corrupt does not give the parishioners the privilege to be corrupt. Just because the hierarchy is corrupt doesn't allow everyone else to go, well, they do it, I can do it. And see, we adopted that in our American culture, right? Well, they do that. I've seen that in the army. My senior rater does it. And what that basically means is the man that signs my report card, he did it, so he can't chew me out. Oh, he can. That's a dangerous thing to say, especially if your senior rater's around. But it's a way of saying, hey, the leadership did it, I have a right to do it. And that's a dangerous road to be on, because then you begin to slip into a slippery slope of morals and moral failure. And in this case, failure with your God. And the children of Israel have always had this problem throughout the Old Testament. They would have this weird relationship where God would deliver them. Just go over to the book of Judges. They would have peace in the land. And then they would sin. And the Lord would send an oppressor. And here in a few minutes, or in a few chapters, you're going to see the Lord send his favorite oppressors, the Philistines. And they oppress the children of Israel. The children of Israel cry out, Lord, deliver us. I don't know why this happened to us. Yeah, actually you do. You just have an amnesia like kids. Parents walk into a room, stuff everywhere. You hear the crash. You always hear the crash first, isn't it right? It's kind of like the flash before you hear the explosion, right? It's whoosh. You hear the crash. You say, what happened? And usually the response is, or nothing, right? You go into the room. There's whatever all over the floor. And you go, what happened? And the response is, I don't know. Cosby says it right. Kids have brain damage. Because only someone with brain damage can be so guilty and yet look at you with innocent little eyes and go, it wasn't me. I have a niece, I will not mention her name. The first time she said a complete sentence, it was a total lie. And the bad thing is, it was a total lie in front of 10 or more witnesses. She had an affinity for drinking Diet Coke. My mom had her Diet Coke in a little soft styrofoam cup from a Stop and Rob. She reaches out to get the Diet Coke. She gets it about right here. Now, she's working good to get this thing, because it's like one of the, anyhow. She about gets it to her mouth, and it falls. Whoosh. Sopping wet in Diet Coke. Diet Coke on the floor. Everyone looking at her wearing Diet Coke. And she looks and she goes, I didn't do it. While we thought it was cute, it was still a lie. See, just because the leadership doesn't give us the license to have the brain damage to say, oh, I didn't do it, or I didn't know. Elkanah and Hannah know what right looked like. They go once a year because they know that that's an obligation not to the priests, not to Eli, but to whom? God. God will get these guys. He gets them in a great fashion. They suffer. They hold the things of God in contempt, and when that happens, it goes down to the next tier, and then when it goes down to the next tier, and it has its ability to poison the whole group. And the fight is for the people to not allow the poison to get further, because when you begin to adopt the position of leadership, everything goes south. They have utter contempt for the things of God. Absolute, total contempt for the things that He has. And it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. Oh, look. Oh, there we go. Went down the wrong pipe. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest servant would come to the man who was sacrificing and said, "Give meat to the priest to roast." Why? "We will not take boiled meat from you, only raw." When a godly man would say, I put that in there because this would be the response of a godly man, let me burn the fat first. Let me burn God's portion first. He says, no. If you don't give it to me now, I will take it by force. Absolute corruption at the temple in Shiloh. The boy Samuel is ministering before the Lord. A young boy who does not know all the things that God would have this young man do is ministering before the Lord, and these adults are absolute wretches, holding in contempt the very things of God because they can, thinking that they will escape judgment because they can. When we hold the things of God in contempt, we are slowly enjoying the last few breaths of life on this earth. We think at times because God is far off, we can do as we will. He doesn't see it. Right? Kind of like when little kids do the hide and seek game. This happened in Italy. I'm sure you've heard this story before. I would come home and I'd have two little girls hiding with 2 feet sticking out underneath the covers or the curtains, giggling. I know exactly where they are. I can instantly walk in the door and go, boo, gotcha, haha. But you play it up. Are you behind here? No. Hee. Are you upstairs? Thump. And my Italian neighbors must have really thought, because Italians are very quiet people unless there's soccer on. And then you realize just how thin your walls are. So they got to hear a lot of stuff from us, because Americans are loud. So you go stomping, boom, 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 boom. Are you up here? No. Why? They couldn't see me. They didn't know I could see their feet. They didn't know I could see the fact that the curtain was kind of bulged around. 2 human-shaped objects about this tall. Daddy was oblivious. We had hidden from Dad. No. You hadn't hidden from Dad. You had a very low view of what Dad knew. It's the same with us, with God. We look around and go, God doesn't see. Because folks, if we lived as though God saw every action, we'd be terrified to commit sin. Right? If you knew that Jesus was in your car right next to you, would you road rage? I probably would the first time until he looked at me like this. And then I would let him drive, and then he would just part the lanes. That's not fair, Jesus. It's not right. If you knew Jesus was next to you all the way you went, you'd be very careful at what you did. But since we cannot see Him, we have the idea that He isn't seeing this. See, Hophni and Phinehas believe that they will escape the judgment of God. They are the men of power. They believe that they are going to escape this, and they live that way. And it's so easy for the Jews to go, hey, this is just how we roll in Shiloh, and this is just how we're going to do it, and I'll just start doing it. See, Hannah could have easily kept Samuel and said, well, priests are filthy men. They're not fulfilling their obligation to God. I'll keep Samuel here because I've wanted a man-child from the Lord for a long time. But notice she gives the child, and the Lord blesses her with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Utter contempt. Utter contempt before the Lord. Why? Because they look at the things of God as though they're options. Let me burn the fat, take as much as you want. No. Give it to us now, and if not, we will take it by force. Now, there's some good, godly people, right? I've been in a church where they've passed the offering plate, and if they felt like they didn't get enough, they shut the doors in the back, and they passed that plate again until they got what they thought was enough. Folks, that's coercion. And that's holding that in contempt. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord. For the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. So here's the camera as it closes out. It's zooming in on them, and in that view, you see the utter contempt that they have before the things of God. We see this today when you have ministers coming out on the side of homosexuality is okay. It's just a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle the church should have done. There's a guy by the name of Rob Bell. The guy's going to be shoveling the largest pile of coal in hell right next to a guy by the name of Friedrich Schleiermacher. You want to know who that guy is? He's the inventor of modern German liberal criticism in the 1800s in Germany. Rob Bell said in a recent interview with Oprah, as she was connecting with her spirit, that Christians are going to have a hard sell with most modern Americans quoting a 2,000-year-old book about moral and sexual relationships. This book that sources back 2,000 years doesn't speak authoritatively anymore about the relationship between man and woman, and man, and woman. And the church needs to embrace that. That's holding the things of God in contempt. We have pastors that utilize their people for a great gain, for the sole purpose of getting them to the next tier. They're holding the things of God in contempt. When you have people in the pew living a life of outward contempt towards the things of God, same principle. Just in this case, the analogy and the example is the godly men and the priest at Shiloh. But folks, lest we think that this is only a problem amongst ministers and leaders within the church, this is a problem amongst every person that draws breath within the walls of the church. And it's so easy to take the things of God and hold them in utter contempt. I don't like that rule. When you hear a conversation about tithing, does your mind instantly go to, well, the New Testament doesn't say anything about tithing? We're looking for the loophole. We're looking for the exit. We're looking for the justification to rationalize away the behavior that we don't like. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord. And they treated the offering of the Lord with great contempt. But Samuel, some texts don't have the but there, it's there. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord. See how it shifted. Samuel starts off, it shifts to Hophni and Phinehas, and now it shifts back to Samuel. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a young boy was ministering before the Lord. Would it have been easy for him to follow? Because who are the people that oversee Samuel's life at the temple? Eli, Hophni, Phinehas, and the servants that are stealing from God. Those are the young boy's tutors. But Samuel is ministering before the Lord. And his mother and father come and visit him. And notice what the text says. Each year, so once a year, he gets his do what's right speech from mommy and daddy when they bring him a new set of clothes. He knew what was right even in a very young age. He did what was right even in a very young age, when as a child could have simply said, hey, these guys are driving a cool chariot and get to wear cool clothes and eat really, really, really good. Kind of want to be in with this circle. You see that with youth and getting involved in gangs. When you're in the inner city, and I worked inner city for 9 years, you had kids that were good, godly kids who the glamorization of the thug gang lifestyle was just too great. And what they saw were the cars and the respect and the money and the things like that. What they didn't see was the jail time and the prison and the being shot by a rival gang and the drugs that you put in your system that ate away your mind, and you became nothing more than a mid-level hitman for some other purpose, or they beat you down. The boy Samuel. See, it looks bleak, but notice what it says. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord. When all the others were doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord, there is still hope for Israel, because the boy Samuel is doing what is right at the temple. The boy Samuel will grow into the man Samuel, who will do what is right for the people of the Lord until they reject him for a king. See the fickleness of the people. Give us a king. Give us a king. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, and may the Lord give you children by this woman for the petition she asked for the Lord. So they returned, and indeed the Lord visited Hannah and conceived, and bore him 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord, in spite of the example being set for him at Shiloh. Eli, Hophni, Phinehas, and the rest of the priests. In spite of all that, in spite of the negative characteristics that are associated with going, because this is the tradition at Shiloh, in spite of all of that, the boy Samuel grew in knowledge of the Lord. Samuel was instilled with a very high view of God. Hophni and Phinehas have a very low view of God. Matter of fact, they have no view of God. It's very easy in our culture to look at a situation and say, well, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is doing it. I need to get my piece of the pie while I can. And that is a cultural belief. But that is not a Christian belief. It's very easy to look and say, well, I see ministers doing all kinds of horrible things. That's why I don't go to church. And there are. But that doesn't justify not going to church. Well, I don't go to church because there's a bunch of hypocrites there. We are. And so are you. So you might as well join the rest of us. Right? These are excuses we use to justify behavior, yet we have the example that in spite of all this wicked behavior, a young boy could see the things of God and know what the things of God are and aspire to minister before the Lord in spite of all the other junk going on. And that's the life we're called to. Why? Because everything else holds the things of God in contempt. We're about ready to partake of the Lord's Supper here in a few minutes. And for some folks, it is absolutely nothing. It has nothing to it. They could take it and go and sin. They could sin and come and take it. And it would not bother them at all. But yet Paul tells us not to take of it unworthily, because when we do so, we invite condemnation upon ourselves. Why? Because this is something that is designed to represent the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and we take of it to remember the Lord until He returns. What is the remembering of the Lord? The remembering of the sacrifice of the Son. That the sin that we have in our lives required someone else to bleed their blood and take upon themselves physical pain for our crime. And there are some folks that hold it in utter contempt and have no altering effect because it's just juice and crackers. When I worked in the inner city, I had a kid come up and ask me for seconds one day. I said, no, we don't get seconds at the Lord's Supper. We just don't. He didn't know any better. But I had a chaplain assistant eat the wafers one day because he was hungry. He pushed till I got tired. And I was sitting down. Because he held those things in contempt. Well, it's just bread. It's just juice. No. They represent the cost of sin. They represent the penalty Christ paid. They represent something far greater than just bread and juice. While they are only bread and juice, the representation of what they are is far greater. And here's the thing. Sometimes we hold that cheaply. And when we hold that cheaply, we hold the atonement cheaply. We have an obligation to be like the young boy Samuel, who in spite of all the wickedness in the world around him, grew in the knowledge of the things of the Lord and would lead Israel until they elected a godly king. Or until the Lord elected a godly king, more aptly. Let's pray. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we come before you this evening. We see the example of what happens when men of God hold the things of yours cheaply. How easy that poison spreads down, how easy it is for a people to then hold those things cheaply as well. Heavenly Father, I ask that you be with each and every one of us here, that we seek the life of the young boy Samuel. In spite of our politicians who betray us, in spite of folks we put our faith into that let us down, we seek you who never fails us or forsakes us. That we grow in the knowledge of you in spite of the failures of others. I ask Heavenly Father to be with us tonight as we observe the Lord's Supper, an event that is representative of your Son's death, the breaking of His body, of the shedding of His blood for the forgiveness of our crime. I should be with each and every one of us here, and that as we prepare to take the Lord's Supper, we prepare our hearts. We make our hearts right. If there's any unconfessed sin, we make that right now, so that we take of it in a worthy manner. We ask for these things in your name we pray. Amen.